busy show today. It's a Southport cover-up special. I'll be speaking to the leading investigative journalist who says that we have been lied to by the authorities and the Prime Minister. It's an explosive interview. Plus, Donald Trump is now the 47th President of the United States. We'll go live to California for reaction. What is the mood of the nation? Can he bring America together? Can he make it great again? But we start with a very important hot take. It's official. The state does not protect its citizens. And if those citizens speak up, express concerns, follow their gut instinct, respond to credible information, or God forbid, go on a protest, they are labelled as extremists. Which takes me to the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, who has been forced to admit that he knew about the Southport triple murderers' links to terrorism before it went to trial. And more importantly, he knew about it when he labelled people out protesting the cold-blooded murder of 3 little girls at a Taylor Swift dance class as far right. Now, it's always been my view that Sir Keir Starmer is a shallow opportunist. He's done more U-turns than Lewis Hamilton. But this story demonstrates that he is an instinctively dishonest man. And this whole Southport story is a new low for his premiership, as it throws a light on his character and judgment. Now, Starmer is hiding behind the fact that he didn't want to prejudge any criminal trial by revealing terror links. No one is disputing that. But he didn't have to make a speech hours after the attacks, with relatives in Southport still grieving, to politicise the whole thing and to play games by condemning protesters with the far-right label. Given that everything is now far-right, including, we're told, mathematics, merit, knitting, and even the countryside, I would suggest that term is losing its meaning. But Starmer was happy to go there during those protests. Yes, the breaking of the law is always wrong, but if only he felt so strongly during those so-called weekly peace marches in which Hamas terror supporters have wreaked havoc in our great cities, ignoring the rule of law, indulging in plenty of hate speech, and making Jewish people afraid to leave their own homes. Now, the Southport triple murders were a national tragedy and a moment of national mourning. But our Prime Minister, who is there to bring the nation together and address genuine concerns among the public, concerns which have been proved right, instead chose to divide the nation. In my view, Keir Starmer's goose is cooked, and no one will believe a word he says ever again. Not that many did. Two-tier Keir strikes again with a two-tier approach to this vile crime involving, before we forget, 3 innocent, beautiful little girls. Is Starmer going to apologise to those who he labelled far-right? Is he going to take those words back? I think those labelled an extremist, whose instincts that there was more to this story than met the eye have been proved right, should sue him. A class action lawsuit against the Prime Minister for libelling an entire chunk of the population. Wouldn't that be fun? Now, the wider implications of this terrible story are chilling. The Southport killer, who we can name as Alex Rudakubana, was referred not once, but 3 times to the anti-terror group Prevent, who seem to spend most of their time worrying about, you guessed it, the imaginary far right. And why did Sir Keir Starmer make that speech condemning his own people when he reportedly knew that this dangerous 17-year-old had downloaded and studied an Al-Qaeda training manual and even experimented with manufacturing the deadly poison ricin? Let's be clear, those writing after the vicious murder of these little girls, they represented, those out protesting the vicious murder of these little girls represented millions of us who could not understand how something so violent could happen in this supposedly civilized country. It struck us as impossible that it was just some regular kid who lost the plot. But the public were left in the dark in the immediate aftermath, a huge mistake on the part of the Home Office and the police, who seemed at the time to be more concerned about political correctness and controlling the narrative rather than being straight with the British public. Without jeopardising a possible court case, we deserved to know more than we were told, and certainly not to be told the opposite of the truth. A view shared by several top cops who joined me on my old TV show at the time, because it was the lack of information and treating us like children that made a grave situation far worse, and for real misinformation to blossom, which it did. Even now, with this monster pleading guilty, we still know so little about what happened in Southport and why. Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, has announced a public inquiry. Well, of course she has. That will be the bureaucratic fig leaf behind which this egregious government hides. A lengthy public inquiry will be the perfect shield for our lawyerly Prime Minister. Just look at the BS that we were told at the time. Before this murderous monster was named, we were repeatedly told that he was just a Welsh lad and born in Cardiff. As we now know, that didn't tell the whole story. His parents are both immigrants from war-torn Rwanda and may have borne the mental scars from the genocide in 1994. This is the kind of information that matters if you're going to prevent a future terror attack. Now, we may be talking about very damaged people. We may not, but it's important to get to the truth. If there had been more transparency from the start, public anger would not be a fraction of what it currently is. But the authorities, the police, the Home Office, the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister took us for fools and asked us to ignore the evidence of our eyes and our ears. Proof of an authoritarian regime if ever you needed it. Now, I think there are parallels here between the Southport triple murder and the grooming gangs. A woke impulse to look the other way and to be more focused on community tensions and cultural sensitivities than the truth, than the rule of law, than the protection of our children. Those 3 little girls were let down by a failed system in which a twisted, hateful, un-British ideology was allowed to fester as a result of pathetic political correctness. Fair play to the Reform UK leader Nigel Farage, who at the time of the Southport attacks did everything he could to keep the British public in the loop, in contrast to our Prime Minister. Of course, Farage got dog's abuse for doing so, but he's used to it. It was ever thus that the truth will get you cancelled. Well, let's hope that Sir Keir Starmer is cancelled in the weeks or months ahead for his wicked and misleading political games at a time of national tragedy. And as the excellent Matthew Goodwin mentions in his Substack article this week, there is a link between immigration, a lack of integration and violence. That is a conversation we now need to have. And let me tell you, it isn't far right to do so. Thank you so much for watching. Now, to see the Mark Dolan Show completely ad-free, a longer version of the programme, plus extra bonus content and live videos, and your chance to message me, then head to my Substack at markdolan.com. Well, for more on the Southport murders, let's get the views of someone that's been working very, very hard on this story for a number of months, and that is writer and commentator turned investigative journalist Charlie Astor, who has an incredibly authoritative Substack account, which I'd hugely recommend that you go to because all the details of the case are in there. She's been very brave. She's risked her reputation and indeed at times the law to cover this important story, and she joins me now. Charlie, welcome to the Mark Dolan Show.
Thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you. First of all, the Southport triple murder case, what are the headlines?
The headlines are that Axel Rueda-Cabana has pled guilty after originally having a not guilty plea entered in on his behalf. This was a shock to everyone, it seems, even to the legal teams surrounding the families. There has been an extensive cover-up of the true nature of his identity and his personality and his behaviour and the extent to which he has been engaging in this kind of violence and terrorism.
There's no reason why the authorities could not have said that this was a terror-related incident within 24 hours of the attacks.
Well, technically, they couldn't say that because the definition of a terror attack in this country, unless it is committed on a group of people or an individual with an express political motive or is conducted with a bomb or a gun, it cannot be declared a terror attack. Because Axel Rudakabana has not declared a motivation to the police, they cannot declare it a terror attack. But yes, the state should have at least said, it appears to us in the first instance that this is terror motivated. But they didn't. They chose to say that there was no terror link at all, which was a flat out lie.
So is the term cover-up appropriate in relation to how the authorities expressed what was happening within the first day or two of the attacks?
I believe so. You only have to look at the way the media covered the identity of who this person was. Now, originally it's because he was under 18. He turned 18 only 8 days after, I believe, being arrested. And so the laws in this country mean that the identity of a child being suspect in a crime cannot have their identity declared. However, within a few days we found out exactly who he was because the judge decided it was in the public interest for everyone to know, because the media had portrayed him as a quiet Welsh choir boy, which to most people in Britain gives the image of, you know, a white working class lad in the hills, you know, very, very unassuming. Which frightened people because we've never seen this kind of attack from a native British child.
Indeed. What's your appraisal of Sir Keir Starmer's handling of this case, and particularly in the aftermath when he made a speech calling out far-right protesters on the streets?
I think his appearance at the memorial the day after sums it up. He was at the memorial for these girls for 19 seconds. He all but threw down the reef, and having spoken to several of the families now who've had daughters injured in this attack, they were disgusted. One of them almost threw up. They could not believe the callousness. You know, his eyes were darting left and right. You know, he barely raised his eyes to look around him. Obviously, he was being heckled by locals who knew the girls, who were terrified for their own children, who were either there or knew the other children who were there could have been their children. And I think from that point, people knew something wasn't quite right. And I think the guilt was there, you know, that he knew exactly who this kid was, because the authorities knew who this kid was way before this attack happened.
Do you think Keir Starmer is now in a difficult situation with regard to how he acted straight after the attacks? Do you think he's politically in trouble?
It's difficult to say that he wouldn't be. I think he's trying very hard at the moment to distance himself from the way that the case has been handled, kind of by portraying himself as an outsider, as someone who is of the public and didn't know much more than the public. You know, he came out today and said that, you know, I know the legal process very well. I couldn't have said anything otherwise. I would have jeopardised the case and you'd all be raking me over the coals if this guy got off scot-free. There is no way in hell this guy would have got off scot-free. Even if some of this stuff had come out, the evidence against him was so strong. They have body cam footage of him being arrested on the scene, the attack. There was no way he was getting out of this. So these are just weasel words. Starmer knew who this guy was and chose not simply to not declare the facts, we can almost understand that, but to deliberately counter-signal that which was known to be true, that there was a terror link, terror motivation, terror inspiration to this attack. And he said that there categorically was not.
Will Sir Keir Starmer regret labelling protesters at the time as far right?
Not in his own personal moral sense, I don't believe so. I believe he'll probably go to the grave thinking that he was perfectly entitled and perfectly right to decry these protesters as far right. But I think he will politically. This will expedite his departure from office. I do not believe he will make it to the next election, but simply because people, when they get the details of this case, they will not be able to tolerate seeing the faces of our politicians on the TV screen every day. They will have to go.
So you think this Southport story will ultimately bring Sir Keir Starmer down as Prime Minister?
And Yvette Cooper, I think anyone who was at that Cobra meeting the first couple of days into the riots would have been informed of everything that went on. You know, we saw the chief of the Metropolitan Police come out of that Cobra meeting and snatch that microphone off of that journalist and practically throw it on the ground. There was a reason he was angry, and it's because I'm sure he was being asked to do things he was deeply uncomfortable with. But I think, you know, chief of police up in Merseyside is going to have to be looked at, you know, because she was sort of complicit in the narrative that was moving forward. If you examine her speech very carefully, you can see she said, with regards to the terror manual, which everyone said, oh, but you can download it off of online, you know. No, you can't. She said a useful version. It is illegal to own such a copy in this country. So the hints were always there, but it's been cloaked in very sophisticated language.
Just to clarify, can you express the clear reasons, the clear evidence in your view as to why this was a cover-up by the authorities, why the public were lied to, rather than just information being concealed, which of course are two different things?
For me, it is the counter-signalling of the truth. It was he's a Welsh choir boy, very quiet. We're seeing reports off the neighbours today, you know, suddenly it was, oh, he was very quiet and unassuming, and now it's, he would glare at you, he was terrifying, he was clearly disturbed. You know, these reports didn't come out, and I don't think that would have damaged the case because he was never going to get off. And, you know, the Home Secretary, Keir Starmer, said these were not terror-related inspired incidents, and they very clearly were.
Now, would you put that down as a lie by Sir Keir Starmer or misinformation, or can we be kind to him legally and just say that that's a reasonable interpretation that this was not a terror-inspired attack?
He said himself this morning that he himself would declare it a terror attack. Would that be the legal definition of a terror attack? He can't because it isn't, but he's talked about changing the definition of a terror attack to accommodate such styles in the future. I think he very clearly knew who this person was, and he could have said, you know, we can't discuss it at the moment. We know that he has as extensive material in his house relating to terror incidents, but because this is the definition, we cannot declare it as such. That would have put a lot of people's minds at ease, but they didn't. They instead said it the direct opposite.
And in the aftermath of this awful triple murder, the police were very parsimonious with information for the public. And I actually spoke to a former retired cop myself on my old TV show, a former detective, who said that actually the police should have been far more open with the public because the fact that they weren't led to more trouble, more misinformation, and the terrible idea of burning down a local mosque.
Exactly. So what we now know, it's been covered slightly in the press, but I've heard more from the families who have seen photographs of his bedroom, for example. He was inspired by many different kinds of radicalism. And if they'd brought that up, if they said, yes, there are some Islamic-inspired materials in his house, but there's also the mass shootings in schools in America. There was a handful of Nazi-inspired extremism materials in his house. If they had come forward and said these things, it would have deflected from this, and also being transparent about how his parents got into the country. You know, were they refugees, or as it's now transpiring, did his father have a role in this in the genocide, and has that been an impact upon the family? All these extra details surrounding the case, rather than actually addressing Rudy Cabana himself, but the family and the his schooling and stuff like that, all could have definitely have been talked about.
Charlie, if there was a cover-up by the authorities, by the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary, or if we were lied to, what would have motivated that?
I think the same as has motivated the cover-up of the grooming gangs for several decades now. The facts of this case are rather politically inconvenient. The perpetrator, the accused, and now the going to be convicted murderer, is the child of immigrants. There is clearly severe issues with integration. He did not integrate, and from reports of the neighbours, the family struggled to integrate as well. They have a traumatic history. What were the circumstances in which they were allowed to come into the country? And if there is this background in the genocide, why were they not monitored if they were deemed safe to be in this country in the first place? There's lots of questions that just aren't being answered in this. Why, for example, why did they move? I have some intel on that I'm beginning to be able to flesh out with actual documentation. He was known to prevent, since he was 13 years old. That's not normal.
No, it isn't normal. Look, I know you're busy. We're going to wrap things up, but just before you go, a couple of quick ones. First of all, we can both condemn the violence that we saw in the aftermath of the triple murder. People were angry. That doesn't justify breaking the law. But do those who protested but didn't break the law have a right to feel aggrieved now about being labelled far right by the leader of the nation, the Prime Minister?
Absolutely. It was not the time or the place. As we saw today, he's very much tried to pivot away from repeating those words while still sort of saying the same thing in vain. I think he knows that it was a step too far, and even if he wanted to perhaps later on declare it as such, we haven't seen substantial evidence that this was as they said. That was another thing that led people to think there was something suspicious about this, that the EDL would come back out of nowhere. We've not seen substantial evidence corroborating that. That massive hordes of people were being bussed into these towns and into Southport. If you look at the arrest records and prosecution records for the violence, there are some people that have come from Manchester and bigger towns surrounding Southport, but actually quite a lot of people were in Southport. So I think it was a very sort of hazy portrayal of what had actually happened.
Do you have any hope that lessons will be learned and that this sort of issue will be dealt with in a more open way in the future?
I think the intensity of the reaction has certainly given the establishment pause for what they should do. I think they should be changing the definition of a terror attack in law. I think we should revise what our contempt of court rules are, because actually they're extremely vague, and that means that people won't go anywhere near the line in fear that they might cross it. Because they're not quite sure where the line is. But unfortunately, Keir Starmer said today, a line has been drawn in the sand, a line has been drawn in the sand, but a line in the sand can easily be kicked away again, as has done with the grooming gangs. And so, this line, in fact, has been drawn in the blood of those children. And if it's not honoured, it will be because our political establishment has scrubbed that line out.
And you've become an incredibly important journalist in this country. Your Substack is Charlie Astor, and you've been covering the story at length, and you felt the need to because the media have been silent.
That's my secondary reason for doing it. I understand their silence. I'm frustrated with it. I've looked deep into the contempt of court laws, obviously in covering this, so that I did not cross the line at any stage. But some of them did not go anywhere near it. This stuff about Rudy Cabana's father had nothing directly to do with what would have come up in the trial. They could have published it, they did not. So yes, their silence is one of the things that intensely frustrated me. But the reason I did it is because I do condemn the violence, obviously. You should not be trying to murder people in asylum hotels, even if obliquely you feel it is justified because the government have not got control of our mass immigration, and we have seen increasing violence from these people who have turned up with no background. But what struck me most is that those people, working class people, these are working class communities that are bearing the brunt of this, they were villainized, having been ignored time and time and time and time again. If you take every means possible, voting, petitions, peaceful protest, and you are not heard year after year after year after year, you cannot be surprised that some people are pushed too far and throw bricks and things like this. I don't like it, but unfortunately it's simply the way that human beings are. And I don't like the fact that my kin, essentially, in working class northerners were pushed to this level because they were being ignored by the establishment.
Now, Charlie Astor has no resources with which to conduct her journalism. She's done it out of her own pocket on her own time. So the way that you can help in the Mark Dolan Show community is to give Astor a follow on X, Astor_Charlie. But most importantly, go to her Substack where there is genuine free speech, and you'll find a capacious volume of material on this subject in Charlie's Substack, and it is Charlie Bentley Astor on Substack. Do check that out. Charlie, we'll catch up soon. Thanks for your courage.
Thank you for your time.
Well, it is official. Donald John Trump is the 47th President of the United States. Few novelists could pen a life as extraordinary as his, and truth is stranger than fiction, as this maverick billionaire is once again the leader of the free world. Well, to take the pulse of a nation, let's head to California. And one of my favourite political commentators, the author of America's Last Stand, the host of the Drew Allen Show, and of course the author of the very popular Drew Allen Substack. It is Drew Allen. Drew, the inauguration has taken place. He's taken the oath. Trump is back. What are your emotions?
I'll be honest. I felt like I had a dopamine injection watching the inauguration and his speech because, honestly, Mark, the United States of America is the greatest nation in the history of mankind. There's more opportunity here, prosperity. It's the most powerful still. And we as Americans, we're privileged to grow up here. We're privileged to have that citizenship, but because we're born here, because our ancestors fought for this country. And we should feel proud all the time, and yet we don't. And what you get what we got under the Biden administration in the last 4 years certainly was just doom and gloom, depression. And I sat there listening to Trump saying these obvious things that I just articulated, and I just felt like I could do anything. I felt like, the world was my oyster, but I believed in this kind of manifest destiny again. And more than that, it was like there was a confidence, right? I mean, it was psychological what you're experiencing, which is simply, every nation should strive to feel this. Every citizenry should feel that way about their life and their country, that their government is looking out for their interests, and that, they should wake up every day feeling that they have the greatest chance to succeed that can be given any man.
How did the speech go down?
Well, it was, he got off teleprompter a couple times and gave a little bit of a juice to it. When he's on the teleprompter like he is, he kind of does, a lower energy version of the presidency or whatever, this image is. But no, it was powerful. I actually went back through and read the transcript after I watched it because you kind of miss things. And it was just firing on all cylinders, really. Well, it was a really tremendous speech. He attacked the government, not the citizenry. Think about that. You're the president of the United States. You are the executive branch. And you're sitting there saying, this government sucks. I agree with you. And we're going to give this country back over to the people. He called today Liberation Day. And of course, he talked about some of his promises in his executive orders that were prepared. I mean, little things too. I'm sure Obama was upset. He's going to change the name of Mount Kinley, which Obama changed to Mount Denali. He's going to change that back to Mount McKinley, and it was just full of pride in the nation.
Will Donald Trump be the president to kill wokery stone dead?
Yeah, I mean, he's already done it effectively. I mean, you'll understand, but he's effectively done it with the executive orders. So he has made it the federal position that there are only two genders, male and female, with an executive order, and basically he's eliminated diversity, equity, inclusion, which is Marxism, right, and discrimination in federal law. So with the stroke of a pen, he did eradicate those philosophies that are really responsible for every nation's demise right now in the Western world.
For sure, but obviously that change in the constitution, or how it's stated legally, is one thing. But will it feed through into the culture of the nation? Because that's the biggest challenge, isn't it?
It is. I think that it will, because even before he was when he was president-elect, before today, the inauguration day, you already saw the left in this country losing the war as it pertains to the transgender issues, which of course is gender theory. There's multiple sexes and genders and all that. It was unpopular, and it's one of the reasons that Democrats themselves admitted that they lost the election, that cultural issue alone. And it's a lot of them are trying to flee it. Now, some are doubling down on that issue, and if they want to die on that hill, I say welcome to it.
Well, you can see certain corporations have already fallen into line. Harley Davidson, McDonald's. We know that Mark Zuckerberg is suddenly a fan of free speech. The Trump effect is in full flow. But the plan, Drew, is to grow the economy, create jobs, put America first, stop illegal immigration, end expensive wars, and drain the swamp in Washington. Can Trump really do all of that? Is there a danger that expectations are now too high?
Expectations are absolutely too high. I would warn people out there to adopt the mentality that I have, which is, you aspire to achieve all those things, just like you do in your own life and profession. You set your sights very high, and then you expect that, you're not going to accomplish every single one of those things. But I do expect a lot of those things to be fulfilled. It's a very different political climate in America, and actually throughout the West. Right now than it was in 2020 or even 2016. Look, the only thing that's really going to stop him from achieving that agenda that you just laid out is going to be the Republican Party at this point, because even though we have narrow majorities right now, we do control the House and the Senate. And of course, as a legislative body, those majorities are what are necessary to pass that legislation. So we do control those. So we have 2 years effectively that we can do whatever we want, as long as they don't stand in the way of his agenda, which they did in 2016 and 2017. Because the reality is, even if Trump is like the greatest hero we could expect, the fact remains that in Congress, in the House and the Senate, you have plenty of snakes that still exist. Yeah. And the only thing that's going to get them to step in line and stand in line and go about fulfilling the will of the American people is if they fear the American people, right? Because they're there because they want power. So we have to keep the pressure on. And that's why we are in this position to begin with, is because the American people have been sitting there watching Netflix, right? And not doing anything.
It's very true. Drew, is there any way that Trump can bring the nation together? And frankly, should he? Does he need to?
I don't think he needs to change anything. I think that he continues to talk about America and Americans as a whole as being great and deserving, prosperity, deserving these things as the inheritors of such a wonderful nation. And I just want to say something, because you're right to ask that question. I ask that question. I get asked that question all the time. And the reality is, the root of that question, the problem has never really been Trump. It's the media that responds and reacts to him. So, I mean, no matter what he does over the next 4 years, the same cabal that has existed in the past that's weakened is going to say the same thing. So they're the ones that are going to be divisive no matter what. And I think that, the tone that Trump's adopted, even during the campaign, was radically different than he had in the past. And I think that it was a better message. I think that he was a little bit softer in some ways and less divisive, if you will. But politics is divisive, and I think that what you've seen in terms of the coalition he's built already, it's proven that the division that's being created by the voices of opposition out there, they're weakening, and his coalition continues to build regardless of what they say.
Trump doesn't have to seek re-election, of course. Will this alter the tone and fabric of his presidency?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it will speed things up dramatically. He won't feel the need to waste his time with the media and playing those games anymore. He's already, he's suffered and conquered so much in terms of these persecutions and so on and so forth. There's really not much that can affect him anymore, and he doesn't really have an obligation to respond to these people who have lied and tried to destroy his life. They've been proven the villains at this point, and so he's just got to keep his head down and continue to operate as he has. And the momentum here is something that is not, I mean, it's special in world history, I think. I don't think that there's been many opportunities. I mean, we look, Mark, back at the Roman Empire and other places, and, we think about the reigns of, Augustus Caesar, whoever else, but, they were mortal and they only lived a short amount of time on Earth. So their reign might have been 20 years and they did a lot to change the world. We're talking about 4 years here with Donald Trump. And I think that this particular situation in history that's happened because of all these different circumstances gives him the greatest opportunity we've certainly had in our country's history to make true progress.
Indeed. Now, you've become a father for the second time. Huge congratulations to you and your lovely wife. Why is this result good news for your daughter?
Well, the first and foremost, the psychological aspect of it, I want my daughter to grow up in a nation where children believe that they live in a great country, where they believe that they have opportunity, where they aren't indoctrinated at a young age, obviously, of course, culturally, to believe that there's something wrong with them because of their skin color or what they have, compared to some other classmate. And I want her to be safe. I don't want her, little things too, which are actually big things. My daughter should be able to play sports if she wants to and not worry about someone with, a penis, in the locker room with her. These are serious things to a father. And it blows my mind, Mark, that people actually support that sort of stuff. A teacher telling your 5-year-old or 6-year-old, hey, putting in their head, oh, you chose to play with a truck today instead of the doll? There's an operation for you.
It's evil. It should be criminal. Now, your book last year, your bestseller, was called America's Last Stand. Will you vote to save or destroy America? Well, it seems that lots of people read your book and they did vote to save America. Were you surprised by the scale of the victory in November?
Yes and no. I think, my heart was not surprised, but intellectually I was a little bit surprised because I watch the news like anybody else. I look at, the propaganda out there, even though I try and filter through it. And, they lead you to believe that such a thing is impossible or improbable. And so, at the end of the day, I did expect it to a certain extent, but we got burned last time in 2020, and so I think that naturally you put up some sort of guard, right? Like you get your heart broken in a relationship. When you enter into another one, you're like, I don't want to jump in with both feet. I want to, a little distance to protect myself. That's kind of what I think happened here. But when he won on election night, that was the second best moment after today, I think, watching him actually sworn in.
Now, his team is populated by some maverick individuals. It's not just Trump, is it? Elon Musk, you've got RFK Jr. and others. Do you think that team will be harmonious? Are you concerned that some of the egos will be fighting it out in the Oval Office?
Well, okay, first off, I've worked with probably 9 or 10 of the people that have been named to his administration at this point. So I have some insight into the people. I'm really excited about it. I just mentioned that because, these are all, A-type personalities.
Yeah.
Honestly, you're that way and I'm that way, Mark. We're generous people, but, we're firm in our beliefs and we're courageous and whatever. But I think that they would. Here's the thing. Under another president not named Trump, it would be a disaster, an absolute disaster. But Trump is the alpha male, and he uniquely is able to demand this sort of respect. He can have Bill Gates come over and grovel at his feet. Justin Trudeau, the big tough guy in Canada, can come down to Mar-a-Lago and the next day basically almost be ousted from office because Trump, says it should be so, by ridiculing him. So I think that this kind of Avengers list, it would not succeed without really strong leadership, and Trump's just happens to be the guy that can bring this coalition together.
Where do the Democrats go from here? Will they learn from their mistakes? Will there be 4 years of self-reflection? Will common sense prevail or not, do you think, in 4 years' time?
Well, I'm hopeful that in 4 years of time they're, as a political party, extinct. And I think that it's actually likely. They don't have a star. Barack Obama was the biggest thing they could dredge up, and he has no political power or capital at all right now. He's kind of a loser, forgotten. He was a media creation, and when you're a media creation like he was, or Kamala Harris was, or these other Democrats, they eventually lose their power. Trump was not a media creation. He's organic and authentic. That's why they can't defeat him. So no, I think that it's up to the Republicans. If Trump passes, here's the problem in the Western world. We talk a big game. We have all these obvious ideas. You stated them earlier about security and taxation and so on and so forth. It's obvious. But the issue is the political party that is promoting those things never actually fulfills the agenda, generally speaking. So the citizenry never actually gets to experience the benefits of those tax cuts, or the fully, because you have divided power. Somebody comes in, it never happens. So as long as Trump can actually fulfill the agenda, the American people will see, wow, things didn't have to be like they were 4 years ago. Like, we can close the border and secure the border. Wages can go up. Inflation isn't something that can't be stopped or prevented to some extent. So as long as they pass the agenda and do what they've promised to do, I think that you will see the Democrat Party be weaker even in 4 years.
How are the media and the late-night left-wing talk show hosts going to respond to Trump 2.0?
That's a good question. I think they'll be whimpering. I think that a lot of that courageous bullcrap, frankly, that they spew that isn't even funny, that won't even be there. Even though they aren't funny anymore, they pretend to be. They have that kind of volume and delivery. I don't think they'll even be able to muster the delivery.
Yeah, it won't even sound funny. That's interesting, isn't it? Because they can't continue with the vitriol and rage, not knowing that at least 80 million Americans voted for the guy.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to say, Mark, now that you say that, the other thing that was amazing about the inauguration is we just listened to the media, and most of the people that were sitting in that room, the Democrats at least, tell us that democracy was supposed to end today. Like, democracy was done, you know? And they were sitting there, most of them pretty joyfully just participating in the end of democracy. And it just goes to show that they don't have any credibility anymore. It didn't end. The doom and gloom at some point, between COVID and then the end of democracy, where else can you go?
Indeed. Listen, before you go, because I know you got to change nappies and all the rest of it, we mentioned Donald Trump 2.0. So how will President Trump differ from his first stint in the White House?
Oh, well, he knows how to navigate, right? So one of the problems Trump had that anyone would have, frankly, when you don't come from politics is that you don't have trusted people around you. So, he wasn't a governor. Reagan came in with a whole team, right? Because he'd been a governor before. So you have to learn. He doesn't have to learn anymore. He knows where these skeletons are at this point. He knows more or less what needs to be done. And if you look at these 100 or so executive orders that have been put on his desk, this is feverish. This is a man who has been preparing for this moment and this presidency for the past 4 years. So this is somebody who's like, there's a plan, there's a strategy, there is no guesswork. The only conflict will be him having to work with Democrats or Republicans to make sure that they get in line and pass legislation when needed. But this is a different beast. It's a man who survived an assassination attempt. People should not underestimate what that's done to the man, because he really believes it. And he said in the speech, I was, protected or by God to make America great again. And you don't want to compete with somebody who believes that God has ordained them for this purpose, right?
Most definitely. Drew Allen is the host of the popular Drew Allen Show. He can be found on X at Drew Thomas Allen, or subscribe to his excellent Substack, some brilliant articles and content in there. Just search Drew Allen. Drew, thank you. Enjoy the celebrations, and we'll catch up soon.
Thanks. God bless you, brother.
Thank you so much for watching. Now, to see the Mark Dolan Show completely ad-free, a longer version of the program, plus extra bonus content and live videos, and your chance to message me, then head to my Substack at markdolan.com.